Hello and welcome everyone to today's webinar on engaging flexible working teams as part of the Growth Through People campaign. I'm just going to wait for a few seconds whilst we wait for all of you to feed in this morning. But I'd just like to thank all of you for joining in the first instance. So I'm just going to crack on. Thank you for joining us today. And I'm Will Hargreaves. I'm Policy Advisor at the Greater Birmingham Chambers of Commerce. And today we're going to hear from some expert speakers on engaging flexible working teams. Some of you may be aware that the government is currently considering legislation that provides individuals with the right to request a flexible working arrangements. And this covers things such as work location, working hours, but also working patterns as well. It's also backed up by research that suggests that there is demand for long-term remote and flexible working. As we all know, the pandemic has been a huge driver for this. So as such, this webinar will explore best practice approaches to effectively managing, engaging, and getting the most out of flexible working teams. This webinar is part of the Growth Through People campaign, and the campaign aims to help local firms boost productivity and growth through improved leadership and people management skills. It involves 8 free events, and webinars, along with many thought leadership blogs and podcasts throughout this month. And we'll end with a conference on the 30th of March, which will feature a mixture of inspirational keynotes, practical workshops, but also some really thought-provoking panel discussions as well. We'll hear from some very high-profile speakers, the likes of Ian Reid, the CEO of the Birmingham Commonwealth Games, and the likes of Carl George, MBE, and MD of the Governance Forum. I'd like to thank all of our headline sponsors for their support on this campaign, and without their support, this just would not be possible. And that's Aston University, Birmingham City Council, the Combined Authority, and South and City Colleges Birmingham. I'd also like to thank our speakers today for contributing their time and sharing their expertise with our audience today. So we have Sam Harris, who's Employment Associate at Pinsent Masons, and then we'll hear from Helga Henry at Helga Henry Limited. So I'll hand over to Sam shortly, but just before I do that, I'd just like to mention, if you could please complete our post-event survey, which I believe should be in the chat shortly, it would be hugely appreciated. It's not just about our event feedback, but this will really help contribute to future campaigns to support the local business community, but also inform our lobbying activity on a local, regional, and national level. I hope you all do enjoy the session and take away some ideas to implement in your own business today. And please do, if you're on social media, use the hashtag GTP22. I'd also like to say we'll have a Q&A at the end of today's session, and we do have a Q&A function in the chat on the screen. So if you could please submit any questions and we can do those at the end. I'll now hand over to Sam Harris, Employment Associate at Pinsent Masons, to provide some background on the government's recent consultation, making flexible working the default, and what the potential legislation could mean for your business. Sam, over to you.
That's great. Thanks very much, Will. Let me just share my screen. Let's get the slides up. Can you see that okay?
Yeah, I can see that.
Fabulous. All right. Well, I'll crack on then. Well, morning all, and thanks very much for joining this morning. As Will said, my name's Sam Harris. I'm an associate at Pinsent Masons, based in Birmingham, and I specialise in employment law. I've got a short slot to talk to you about a topic which is obviously very relevant at the moment, which is flexible working. Unlike many lawyers, I don't actually like the sound of my own voice, so the fact that you've only got 10 minutes is probably best for everyone. But I'll jump straight into it, and let's have a look at what the current rights are for flexible working, just to sort of set the context for you. Well, what do we mean by flexible working? Probably a daft question, but in a broad sense, what we're talking about is changes to standard working arrangements, which include arrangements whereby employees have some sort of discretion to vary their place of work, the timing of their working hours, and the number of hours that they actually work, or any combination of those things. So what does that look like in practice? Well, that could be any number of things, really, including job sharing, working from home, going part-time, compressed hours, flexi time, annualized hours, staggered hours, phased retirement, all those sorts of things. That's all part and parcel of flexible working. And what statutory rights do employees currently have to make a request? Well, I mean, informally, employees can make a request whenever they want, but the legal position is that employees currently need at least 26 weeks continuous employment to be able to make a statutory request, and they can do that in writing, and they can do it for any reason at all. And they can only make a request once every 12 months. So what then is the employer's obligation when they receive that request? Well, they have to deal with it in a reasonable manner and notify the employee of the outcome, including any appeal, within a 3-month period, albeit there is time, the scope to kind of extend that time frame if it's by mutual agreement. But if an employer wants to reject a statutory request, it can only do so on one of the 8 grounds which is listed in the legislation, which is set out on this slide for you there. It includes things like burden of additional costs, detrimental impact on quality, detrimental impact on performance, etc. I'm not going to read them all out because they're there on the screen for you. But just taking a quick kind of glance over them, as you can see, it's pretty all-encompassing, really. And so long as the reason given isn't a sham, in my experience, it's actually quite rare to see these challenged in a tribunal. More commonly, actually, the challenge will come from an indirect discrimination angle, which I'll cover off in a few moments. But historically, some employers have taken the stance that, well, unless the legislation requires them to accept the request, then computer says no. And there have also been some studies which provide evidence of sort of certain negative perceptions affecting the take-up of flexible working. For example, some men have found to be fearful of a risk to their career development opportunities. And on the flip side, some women have taken the view that they'll probably be overlooked, and that's the price that they pay for being able to work flexibly. But I think there's been a substantial move away from that now. I'm sure we're all sort of glad to hear. Most employers do recognise that there are times when people may need that extra bit of flexibility, whether temporarily or sort of more permanently. And I think one thing the pandemic has demonstrated is that both employers and employees can reap the benefits of new ways of working. Could be through increased productivity, reduced absence, better work-life balance, attracting and retaining diverse talent, and also sort of demonstrating a progressive culture and set of values. And that's not just important for your employees, but it may also be important for the other businesses that you work with, your clients and your customers too. Sort of balance that out a little bit, many employers do still have concerns about the effectiveness of remote supervision generally, or there may be aspects of certain roles that just don't work well when people are working from home. Quite a lot of organisations do still want staff to attend the office 1 or 2 days a week, and the reason being to allow for things like collaboration, mentoring of younger staff, integration of new team members. And those are all completely legitimate things. So quite often here, the key is about getting the balance right. let's have a look at the government consultation then. And recognising all of the things that I've just said, in September 21, the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, that's the BEIS, launched the consultation on amending existing flexible working legislation, as Will mentioned earlier. Although the consultation is titled Making Flexible Working the Default, I do think that's slightly misleading because there's no actual proposal for kind of an unfettered right to flexible working. Instead, they're looking at a right for an employee to just request flexible working from day one of their new job rather than after 26 weeks. And it's, in terms of that current 26-week criteria, well, the challenge to that is, why should someone have to earn the right to request flexible working if ultimately they've got personal circumstances that warrant a request? On the flip side, a day one right could also bring some challenges, and I think particularly it could lead to greater administrative costs, particularly for smaller businesses, because you're more likely to need to respond to an increase in requests. The second thing that the consultation is looking at is whether the 8 business reasons currently sort of mentioned earlier, whether they remain valid. My view is we're unlikely to see a significant change here because the consultation is actually very clear that employers should be able to reject a request where there are, sound business reasons to do so. Thirdly, the consultation is also looking at introducing an obligation for employers to suggest alternatives, if the original request can't be granted. So it could be agreeing to temporary rather than a permanent arrangement, or flexibility on some days only, whatever the alternative might be. And in truth, it's already good practice to do this, and it's what we would recommend to our clients, an open two-way dialogue which allows the employer and the employee to work together, explore and share ideas about possible options which work for both the business and the individual, is always going to be more productive. When the conversation ends up being, one-sided and unilateral, that's when things start to turn sour typically. Finally, the consultation is also looking at whether to change the administrative process required, in particular, whether there should be a right to make more than one request per year, and whether the 3-month deadline for the response is appropriate, and also ways to encourage, more time-limited requests, which is something which is already allowed but arguably underutilized. Again, it's been recognised that this could result in additional administrative costs, particularly for smaller businesses. So the consultation has been clear, actually, that any measures in that respect will need to be reasonable and proportionate to limit any negative impact on business resource. So the consultation ended in December, and we're awaiting a response. So we'll just have to watch this space and see what comes of it. But one thing that I would mention, and I did allude to it earlier, and that will always remain the case, is that when dealing with flexible working, employers have got to ensure that any refusal is not discriminatory. And typically these are the types of claims that I tend to deal with coming out of refusal of flexible working requests. Typically, we're talking about indirect discrimination here, and indirect discrimination is where you're basically applying some sort of provision to everyone, but it happens to disadvantage a particular group who have a protected characteristics. And quite often in this context, it might be related to gender or perhaps disability. So while we're not talking about direct discrimination there, it's indirect, and it is possible to justify indirect discrimination if you have got what's called a proportionate means of achieving a legitimate aim. And really, what we're looking at there is, well, do you have a legitimate aim in the sort of in the criteria that you're putting on everyone? And is it proportionate? And that's a case of balancing the harm to the individual against the needs of the business. So, that's the key area of risk, really, that I tend to come across. So you've just got to have the possibility of indirect discrimination at the back of your mind when you're dealing with these things. So I think my time is virtually up already. I mean, that's flown by, but I'll just run through the sort of 3 key takeaways from my perspective. Firstly, there's clearly a greater cultural shift towards flexible working being normalized, which I think has to be a good thing. And you know, those employers who can offer a full range of flexible working models and not just pay lip service to it are going to be seen as progressive and looked on favorably by those who value these arrangements. Secondly, given that cultural shift and the potential changes in legislation, you're better off considering options for potential work for flexible working proactively, rather than waiting until you've received the request. So think about the capacity for flexible working during the role design and the recruitment process. You might even want to advertise specific flexible working requirements within job adverts, and you know, be clear that you encourage those conversations up front. And you know, to the extent that there's a level of flexibility that can't be accommodated, think about that in advance and think about what your justification is if in the event of a challenge. Then you've got your sound business reason prepared and ready to go should you need it. And then thirdly, you still got to consider each request on a case-by-case basis and bear in mind this indirect discrimination angle. So again, to the extent that flexibility can't be offered, think in advance about exactly what it is you're trying to achieve, whether you could achieve that aim in a different way, which has a lesser impact on whoever the disadvantaged group is. So if you go through that sort of thought process and ideally document it, and you know that lawyers love a good audit trail, hopefully you shouldn't go too far wrong. So those are my 3 key takeaways, and I think that's me done. I'll be hanging around till the end because I think there's going to be a Q&A session if anyone has any queries, but in the meantime I will hand you over to Helga, who's got the next session.
Thanks for the presentation, Sam, and some really good key takeaways there, so really appreciate it. I think it's so interesting, isn't it, just almost the seismic shift we've seen in working patterns, and now it's so important, you know, when you are recruiting to make it clear that you are embracing the flexible working. It's becoming, you know, increasing standard thing on job ads to attract talent, and it's also expected by a lot of people, you know, as the norm now. So it's quite interesting how it's changed through
absolutely.
COVID and really solidified. But if you do have any questions for Sam based on, you know, his presentation or more widely, then please do put them in the Q&A function, which you should be able to see on your screen, and then we can ask Sam some of these questions at the end. I'll now hand over to Helga Henry for a workshop on effectively engaging a flexible working team. So Helga, over to you. Take the floor.
Thank you. So hello, everyone. This is a workshop and not a monologue. So while we are in a webinar situation, I really would welcome, I will be inviting you directly to maybe put some stuff in the chat to respond so that we can have a bit more of a dialogue. That said, I just a little bit about me. I'm a consultant, which means I'm somebody who comes in from outside and brings slides. So I'm just going to put up my slides now for you to see. So yeah, my name's Helga Henry. I've had a background in culture. I've worked in the arts for a long time, but I had a strange interlude in the middle of my career where I was a corporate lawyer at Rag & Co, what's now Gowling WLG. So I have a mix of sort of blue chip law, big company, and then also small arts organizations, all sorts of arts organizations. So I tend to work on their strategy, and it says bringing strategy to life, by which I mean letting people, I'm particularly working with staff teams to implement strategy and make it relevant and vibrant for them. My clients range from the very large, things with Royal in the name, like the Royal Albert Hall, Royal Shakespeare Company, Birmingham Royal Ballet, to the tiny, small specialist arts organisations like Vivid, who are in experimental art space, Deaf Explorer, who work to provide a bridge between deaf artists and the hearing world, and a myriad of people in between, but primarily in the arts and cultural sector. So kind of my first question actually is, if you could in the chat just let me know what sectors we've got in the house today, where people are from, so we've got a chance to just so I can just tweak some of my comments accordingly. I'm hoping to be able to see that in a moment. Oh yes, some things coming in the chat now, thank you. Energy, construction, public sector, advanced credit union, insurance. Lovely, thank you. I'm still hoping that you'll find a lot of what I'm going to say transferable. And if at any point you've got some questions, please let me know. So thanks for that. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of my experiences of negotiating return to work and flexible workplaces in the cultural sector, and feedback some of the things that people have said to me about home working in particular. I also want to talk a little bit about the psychological impact of a return to work. I know that you know, there's been a lot of stop-start. We were gearing up quite well. We had some traction, and then we had Omicron. So it really has, particularly in the cultural sector, been like the hokey cokey. We're in and out. But that, I think what we're still dealing with to an extent psychologically is the fact that when those of us who were able to work from home, and that's a big distinction, did so, we felt safe. And negotiating a return to work is also about negotiating feelings of safety. I've been working on return to work policies for some of my client organisations, and in doing so, I've come across a couple of useful articles which I'll share with you. I'll put those links in the chat after my talk, after the workshop, and then it leaves us with some bigger questions, I think, about the workplace. If in the next couple of minutes, if you have any, now you know what we're going to sort of cover. If you have any specific questions, please either put them in the Q&A or pop them in the chat. I can definitely see the chat from here, so that will be useful. So I think the first thing I wanted to say is, in terms of flexibility, as in working from home, which is what a lot of people now are talking about when they talk about flexibility, is that certainly in my sector, that I was doing a consultation with a group of people who worked in an art centre actually in Belfast, and they pointed out that flexibility is a privilege. In that organisation, there was a venue, a theatre venue, 2 gallery spaces, some learning spaces, a thriving cafe, and now a meeting and conference space, which is kind of coming back on stream as people are coming back to meet. So actually, and there was another theatre I did work for where somebody who was a customer service assistant genuinely asked for, requested to work from home. Well, what are you going to do? Sort of rip tickets and let people sit in your living room? That just isn't possible. So for some people, they are time bound and place bound. And in my world, that would be hospitality and catering, front of house staff, technical and technicians, let alone the actors and performers. If a show goes up at 7:30, saying that you can't make it till 7:45 because you've got to drop somebody off at the nursery doesn't fly. IT is frequently, some people, certainly again, when the building, I worked a lot with in the past, I used to work for Birmingham Hippodrome. When the building was shut down, I know the only people allowed in were facilities and IT. IT literally to make sure the server didn't overheat. Everyone else, for insurance purposes, actually was not allowed back in the building. So as we've seen with key workers, retail, obviously NHS, and other, our redefinition of working shows that actually when we talk about flexibility in terms of not working at the workplace, it is a relatively privileged position. That said, I also had lots of people, I talked to lots of people about what they liked about home working, and here's some of the responses I got. And again, if these chime with you, please say something in the chat. But for all of the upsides, I think there's also a downside. So the big one I got was, I'm more productive. That away from the distractions of the office, away from noise, I'll come on to that, but just being able to, quickly change or not, get in, be at your desk for bang on 9 o'clock, fire up the computer and blast away. So, a lot of people said, I'm more productive. But often when I dug deeper, what they really meant was, I'm keeping on top of emails. I'm keeping on top of emails and Teams. Sometimes not. Teams itself has, it seems, created another whole stream of communications for people not to answer. But yeah, that's certainly something that people were very keen on saying, and that's why they liked it. People who were commuting were saying things like, I get 2 hours of my life back. I've got the picture of a guitar because somebody was saying, I was doing a series of consultations for a group of people. And one gentleman extolled the virtues of not being on the A46. In fact, I've never been in a consultation where one road was mentioned so much in my working life. But and he'd found the time to pick up a guitar that he hadn't picked up for 20 years, and now he has, and actually that was another thing, people finding or picking up hobbies or rediscovering things when they just had that little extra pocket of time. And I think what working during the pandemic from home did was actually throw a very harsh spotlight on our work life generally. And so now I'm wondering, how do we get to this place where we accepted a work life that didn't give us time to pursue our passions and hobbies? How did we get there? I don't have an answer to these things, by the way, but I think these are all factors that are going to have to be tackled if we are going to engage flexible working teams. Next one. People said that it was way easier to manage childcare, and it was. I think there's 2 sides to that. A lot of parents who were homeschooling were dealing with e-learning, dealing with all sorts of upheavals and stop-starts with schools, were knackered, just were exhausted. But in the normal way of business, and a lot of people I spoke to now, if they're talking about, like, if I can get in, if I can do the school run, drop the kids in and come in half an hour later than I might ordinarily, I just have that breathing space. It's a lot easier. But again, I think this points to problems we used to have in the old workplace. I remember long ago, Jan Teo, when she was Chief Operating Officer at Deutsche Bank, when Deutsche Bank came to Birmingham, we were talking about women in the workplace and leadership issues. And she kept saying, I don't think women have a childcare issue. I think business have family care issues. And that too often it's women who are seen as the people who have to take care of childcare, but actually not having family-friendly work practices discriminates against men and women. And certainly when I was a lawyer, I remember literally seeing men with their head in their hands in a stairwell going, I'm so busy, it's my kids' nativity play this afternoon, I can't get time to go. I'm going to miss this. I'm going to miss missing key moments in your family. For some men, I don't, and again, I've not been in a workplace like that for some years, but I'd be interested to know if that has shifted and that has changed. Certainly now with parental leave, with those sorts of things, it might be easier. And then finally, people would say things like, oh, it's so much quieter. It's so much quieter here than it is at the office. If I go back to the office, it's open plan, it's crazy, it's so noisy. And again, that wasn't true for everybody in a working at home. Some had very noisy kids where it's far worse. You know, it really depends. If in the chat, what other things have if you in the chat you can share some other things that people have said about returning to work, perhaps that would be useful. See if something come up. And I suppose and the next question is, in terms of people returning to work, either full-time or back in the office or part-time, where are you in your journey? Are you encouraging people to come back to the workplace? Are people reticent? Are you looking to bring in some sort of flexibility but don't know how? What is your flexible working position? That would be really handy to know before we go on to the next bit. Give people a minute to put something up. I'm hoping that what I've said therefore is chiming. Here we go. Yeah, encouraging but not forcing, return to office, office-based work, taking a cautious approach. I think that's right. A lot of I think that's a lot. That seems to be what a lot of people are doing. Sort of testing things out, wanting to put structures in place, but not quite knowing how to create those structures on anything other than an arbitrary way. The editor of the financial, the FT Weekend magazine, in her editorial this weekend, said, I'm proud to say I'm a twat. It was like Tuesdays, Wednesdays and Thursdays, that she now proudly works in the office Tuesday, Wednesdays and Thursdays, and from home Monday, Friday. And she said, and there's quite a lot of other twats in our office, but I don't necessarily know. I don't necessarily know that you can arbitrarily say it's these days and not others. Fiona, this is long, thank you. Staff voicing that they can't just put the washing in the machine as they're now both back at the office, versus company believing if you work from home, you should be working, not doing chores. We are returning staff back into the office by increasing numbers of days back. I think that's right. But I also think that, I'll come on to this, I think that misunderstands the nature of what productivity is. And actually, I certainly know, having worked in an office 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, there was all sorts of the equivalent of putting the wash in the washing machine. There were things like, I need to buy something, let me just have a quick look online. I'm going to have a cigarette, let me go downstairs and have let me go downstairs, which turns into a 20-minute chat. I'm going to go and have it. I think the idea that when we were in the office, we were all 100% working 100% of the time was as misguided and not true, just as everybody at home is watching daytime telly and eating chocolate and and doing their chores. Neither are true. Oh, I have to leave the office an hour early to put my washing in the machine. Yeah, okay. But I think what a senior manager in Belfast said to me was, I'm not worried about people not skiving if they're at home. He said, because the people who are going to skive whether they're at home or in the office. They'll just be more creative about it in the office. So I think sometimes that's, I know some bosses are kind of a little bit more relaxed about it. Here are some tools that might help you. I read a great article. I'll pop it in the quote. See if I can. Oh yeah, I'm going to pop it in the chat. I read a great article from McKinsey, which was about the lessons that we can learn about the return to work. Oh, sorry, I've just seen another quote. Lisa saying, trust is key here, adult to adult with good performance management. I think that's exactly right. If you're treating your staff like adults, you will tend to get an adult response. And if you're interested in any of that sort of transactional analysis type stuff, that might be something for you to look at. This is a quote from from an article from McKinsey. A military, more about the great attrition. I'd be interested to see if actually you've had, if you've had people leave, if you've been subject to the great attrition, as it's called. But this veteran talked about how she's a reservist, and that she had in the past done several returns to work following tours in Afghanistan and Iraq. And she said that you're given a briefing when you come back as to kind of how you're going to readjust. And she said, but even so, even though you know that's going to be different, you get back and your favorite pizza place has closed down and your sofa isn't as comfy as you remember it. And things just aren't quite as you imagined it, and you're uncomfortable. And she said she got better and better at coming back the more times she went out. But for us, she likened everybody doing what they needed to do during the pandemic to a tour of duty. And now we're returning. So the employee response of leaving, of being reticent, all of that, she's saying it's a normal response to a traumatic period. And actually, if we acknowledge that, and again, I think that does go back to sort of adult conversations, not parenting them, not mollycoddling, not treating them like not being the controlling parent and the angry child. If you can acknowledge that, you can find a way. Another article from McKinsey, this also from McKinsey, this time called "It's Time for Leaders to Get Real About Hybrid," starts with this quote, which I think is really true. What we now have is an opportunity to reimagine how we work. Both, and it was interesting that Sam is saying that can start now at recruitment stage. If you start to think about what does the job really need in terms of presence, absence, and time, I think that you can fold in then some stuff about diversity hiring in terms of what really are the criteria we need for this job, as opposed to slapping a requirement for a certain level of education attainment, which we know does not help diversity of recruitment. We know works against people with certain characteristics. If you think about the need for physical presence, if you get that down to a minimum, you can employ more people with more disabled people. If you look at the capabilities and skills required as opposed to qualifications, you will work in favor of people who tend to be lower socioeconomic backgrounds, who possibly have the ability but didn't have the opportunity to attain the specific qualifications. Another article that I'm just going to leave you with, last couple of slides, an article called "How to Do Hybrid Right" from Harvard Business Review. Again, I wouldn't be a consultant if I didn't at some point quote Harvard Business Review. Was talking about various, and of course, because it's them, they've set up some quadrants, some things to think about, a way of thinking about an approach to working. And this was how you can either have, in time and place, you can be constrained or unconstrained. So we have moved from the traditional office 9 to 5, both time and place constrained, to using offices that have more flexible hot desking type situations, or with more flexible opening hours, have gone to constrained place but unconstrained time. You can work till later, you can go in, go out, you've got a hot desk, you've not got, you're not as bounded. You can work on different floors, you can work in different areas and zones. We got to, it's arguable that what we tried during the pandemic was unconstrained place, but constrained time. People tried to, on the whole, work office hours simply from home. But then what we found is, you know, caring responsibilities, people needing to homeschool, all sorts of things. We got to more anywhere, anytime. And this now gives rise to the argument of, well, if I can work in Birmingham in my bedroom, can I work in a cottage in Wales as long as it's got good Wi-Fi? Can I work in a cottage in Lanzarote, in a villa in Lanzarote? It's the same time zone. Quite how constrained and how unconstrained is our unconstrained time and place? And then if you start to think about that, there's another article from How to Do Hybrid Right. They started to talk about the 4 drivers of productivity, which was coordination, focus, cooperation, and energy. This is quite a detailed slide, so I'm going to give you a moment just to take a look at it. But really what somebody did was merge those ideas of that time and place with the drivers, and then you get to a very, very helpful blog by a woman called Elizabeth Goodman, who started to think about the sort of work that could happen in different places at different times. I'm going to put the chat, give you a minute to look at it. And this starts to address some of the things that I was talking about earlier on. If you can be anywhere 9 to 5, we found certainly through remote working that things like Teams, you can do team management, mentoring and coaching, discussion and debate. That can happen over Teams, over Zoom. Look at us here, we're at a webinar. We can do some learning, we can do some networking. But there are still things that are really needed in a constrained time and place, particularly things that require collective thought, brainstorming. The other thing I would put in that is, and what I haven't mentioned is, that's all very well if you know exactly what your job is, but induction, training, legal trainees, we were talking to Sam when we were prepping this, it's all very well to be stuck with something and go onto Teams and hope somebody replies. If you're all in the same little cluster of an office, in the office, and stick your head above the stand up, just go, hey everybody, can I ask a quick question? You instantly get feedback, you instantly get some help. There's all that learning one does by osmosis. I really think that flexible working should maybe be thought about in terms of post-induction. How are people going to learn the workplace culture if they're not in it? Focus, obviously, if you've got to write a report, if you need quiet time to do things, if you've got something that's really brain achy, of course, perhaps you'd want to be unconstrained as to time and place. And then asynchronous work might be, the thing that gives you energy might be about, are we able to work more with people's circadian rhythms? People are much better if they start their day at 11 and finish at 7. Who are we to say that's not the best way for them to work? Is that might give notion to some core hours. There's lots in that. I'm only just flagging this up as a resource, really, because I've got just a couple of questions now at the end, which perhaps we can move into when we do the Q&A, because it begs because now as we reinvent working, it begs the question, what is a workplace for? Why are people coming into the workplace? Some people have said to me, if they're coming in, they really want it to make it worth their while. So they don't want unproductive meetings. So some of our flexible working policies have actually been underpinned by some better working practices. But I think it's a more social function. It's the place for impromptu learning. It's the place for synchronicity. It's the place to get energy and have a vibe. And so certainly for my clients, it's a fundamental question. We say there's something different about a live theatre performance. So surely there must be something different about live work. My last slide, I'm just going to finish now. I think this reinvention actually opens up a much larger picture of what is our job as employers in regards to enabling self-actualization. Very posh way of saying. Sigmund Freud was once asked what people need in order to live a full and happy life. And he had just 3 words: Leben und Arbeiten, to love and to work. So I think as we start to reimagine flexible work teams, reimagine the workplace, we would do well to think about the extent to which we can make those arrangements contribute to people's self-actualization. That's been a bit of a canter through. I know we've got questions now. If you're interested any more about this or want to get in touch with me, I'm at helgahenry.com, and I hope to take some questions in the Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you, Helga. Very captivating workshop there. So it's certainly very interesting for myself, and I know that plenty of our audience will have some key takeaways there as well. And it's so good to see kind of challenging the common reasons behind, why we think we want to work from home, and actually getting under the skin of them and addressing, the reality of how effective we actually are compared to how we perceive we are. So really eye-opening there, and thank you for that workshop. So yeah, happy to open the floor to questions now for Sam and Helga. I know we've got some that we've got in the Q&A here. So I'll just kick things off though, firstly for both of you really. What do you think the future of flexible or hybrid working will look like?
I don't mind. I don't mind going first, Sam?
Go for it, Helga. Yeah.
Well, I think, first of all, the genie is out of the bottle now, so we're not going back. It feels a bit to me like a pendulum. I think at the minute people are quite reticent to go back. They've really gotten used to, they're kind of cozy. They've gotten used to being able to put the wash on in between emails. I think as everybody's, and it's just a little analogy, that audiences aren't back yet. There are a core people who love the theatre who are back, but a lot of core attenders still aren't back. Now, the $1 million question is, will they start to miss it and therefore want to come, particularly as the pandemic really eases off and we're really out of the woods? Theatres are really banking on that being the case. I think it'll be the same I think people will start to miss that sociability, that culture, that it's a habit, and as we get back in the habit, we'll want a bit more of it. But there's no way we're going back to everybody being in 9 to 5, Monday to Friday. Although that has a massive implication on the support. But in a city centre, for example, that has a massive implication on support functions, on support businesses, the dry cleaners, the sandwich shops, all those little businesses that used to rely on a large footfall daily. Where do they go?
Absolutely. I mean, it's almost, there's a bit of disjointedness, isn't there, across different sectors and businesses. Sam, I don't know whether you'd like to add to that at all.
Well, I think Helga's absolutely right in drawing that sort of pendulum analogy, and that's certainly consistent with what I'm seeing. And in terms of what the future looks like, well, it really is going to depend on the sector, and what services that company is offering and what their requirements are. Yeah, I mean, where there is scope for a hybrid sort of model, I'm certainly seeing the pendulum coming back towards a bit more time in the office, for exactly the reasons that we said earlier. It's about that collaboration. It's about mentoring younger staff, integrating new people as part of their sort of induction, as Helga mentioned earlier. So I think it's going to be getting that balance right, and how that impacts footfall in city centres and stuff like that. Well, we may well see the high street looking a little bit different to what we did previously.
Absolutely. Thank you both for your responses there. I've got a direct question here for Helga. So on your point regarding culture for new starters, how does your research work look at or consider employees seconded into clients where they are separated from the parental culture? I think that's in the Q&A function if you just want to have another look at that. But maybe, would you like to?
Yeah, I saw that a little earlier. I haven't really done much about this, but I think oddly, employees seconded into clients, even pre-pandemic, had similar issues. If it was, it's about contact, not just of it's about information flows and contact, it seems to me. When I was a lawyer, actually, I was seconded a few times to other organisations. I spent 6 months away at the headquarters of British Airways in London. And I think it's what I was thinking about, and in induction too, there's lots of people who've started jobs in the last 2 years who've not actually been to the workplace. And speaking to them, I think employers really have to think about not just, well, we've given you a deck, or we've given you the manual, and we've given you the e-learning, off you go. It'll be about finding ways to do some of that informal sharing. A couple of organizations I know, if there was a 2 o'clock meeting, they'd open the Zoom half an hour earlier, and you could bring a sandwich and just have a chat the way you might just have some lunch with colleagues. I don't know, I've often wondered how, actually, because this is, Teams are possible, that 2 people could work together just on Teams, just to do their respective jobs, but also have a virtual office mate where you can just go. And that certainly younger employees, that there could be about that. Ensuring that the parent culture still invites the seconded client back for social things, or for making sure they're kind of kept informed. I think it's about that, but I think that's always been the case. I don't think that's necessarily a pandemic only problem. And sorry, I've just seen in the chat somebody said, can I share my slides? Yes, happy to.
Yeah, we can share all the slides with delegates after, so you should be able to get a copy of all of them. So yes, so I've got another question here. So from Fiona, so how do we ensure fairness between those who can work from home, for example, not having to drive 2 hours, versus those who have to be at work, warehouse, so on? It's a difficult question, isn't it? So yeah, kind of eye-opening. But yeah, Helga and Sam, would you like to crack on with that, please?
I think Helga's given me the nod that I can deal with that first. I mean, that is a really difficult question, and I think it really depends what you mean by fair, because someone who is applying for a warehouse role, they will know from the very outset that requires them to be in the warehouse, and that requires a commute. And then it's up to them whether the general terms and conditions and the remuneration package is enough to make that worthwhile for them. Where there is a legitimate requirement for someone to be in a warehouse to do warehouse work, I mean, I'm not really sure where you go with that, really, in terms of perceived fairness compared to someone who can do their job from home. But I think, going back to a point that both Helga and I made earlier, I think that the key to it is actually about being upfront and having the open two-way conversations, having those adult conversations, and not just being the parent instructing the naughty child. And making people feel as though they're actually being listened to and consulted with. And to the extent that there is flexibility, or not necessarily in location or hours, but there might be flexibility in other aspects of the job, that is a tool that can be used to sort of motivate and reward those people, so that on the whole, they feel as though they're being treated fairly.
Yeah, I would echo that. There's always been, quote unquote, unfair. There's always been, on that basis, there's always been unfairness in the workplace. I think what I would say is, again, looking at everybody's tasks, and if you are, for example, a warehouse supervisor, and you know, you do a weekly rota. If you want some peace and quiet, can you do that from home and come in a bit later, having done? Are there elements of your work that can be done? If your job is primarily to move, you know, to move and store and stack and, you know, pick, pack and whatever was it, used to do those contracts, picking, packing, some processing. If you've got a pick, pack process, you can't do that from home. If there are elements, the fair thing is to give people that flexibility. But as you say, it's a clear bargain. It's a clear bargain. I can see in the chat that somebody's, I think, just I'll pick it up just because it's here. We're starting to see an emerging issue linked to cost of living rises. Some people feel they're being forced back to the office due to worries about not being able to heat their homes adequately. On the flip side, not being able to afford to travel to work due to increased transport costs. I think everybody heating their home and everybody printing from home is actually is quite a concern, but I don't think it's the same for everybody, and the same for businesses. It costs more for the business to heat the business. It's going to be very tricky for people to automatically assume. I am old enough to remember periods of very high inflation, very high, and very high mortgage rates, and you just had less to spend. You had less disposable income. You know, that was the reality of it. That's the reality of it. So I absolutely understand that the employers will be coming under enormous pressures from people about cost of living increases and worry about cost of living increases. But they apply to the business as well. So I have no answer for that.
Thanks, Helga, and yeah, thanks all for joining us today. So just before I end, I'm just conscious of time. I'm just going to talk about the rest of the Grow Through People campaign and what we have going on, so you're all informed and can hopefully attend. So if you just bear with me, I'm just going to share my screen. So can you all see that? I hope. I can't. Yes, Helga's nodding. Yeah. Okay. Excellent. Okay. So first of all, I mean, thank you both for Helga and Sam for joining us today and offering, you know, your insight. It's been really eye-opening, and I have definitely taken some thought away from this that I could start thinking about with how I'm working as well. And I just wanted to talk about some upcoming Grow Through People events. So we have on the 15th of March next week, Thinking Outside the Box to Unlock Potential. And what we're really going to be addressing here is expert insight on accessing and attracting talented individuals from communities, from underrepresented areas to roles within organisations. And we'll hear from a range of different speakers there, including Jean Templeton, CEO of St Basil's, Rose Rees, Head of Engagement and Skills at Midland Metro, and Johnny Shah, who is head of the Trust Charity at Sandwell. And then also next week, we'll hear on leading open conversations about identity in the workplace. And here we'll hear from Cleo Morris, who's founder and head of diverse business and enterprise at Mission Diverse. And really what we're going to be tackling there is how do we start to lead conversations about the intersectionality of social identities in the workplace and foster an approach to inclusivity rather, which recognises the multifaceted nature of each individual team within your organisation. I'd also like to urge all of you to be aware of our Grow Through People conference, and this is a free conference. It's a half-day conference. It's on the 30th of March, and we have some fantastic speakers that I mentioned at the start there, but you can see some of them, put some faces to names, and that will be really, really good event. I think it's one of our first in-person ones, I believe. So just to reiterate as well, if you can, please do complete the survey. It really does help support us to make better campaigns, really improve on our campaigning activity, especially with Grow Through People and our policy lobbying activity as well. I'd just like to close off by saying thank you to our sponsors as well, Aston University, Birmingham City Council, the West Midlands Combined Authority, and also South and City Colleges, Birmingham. I'd like to thank you all for joining us today. It's been an absolute pleasure. And thank you once again to Helga and Sam for offering their time to help support all of us here today. And thank you. I hope you will take away some ideas, but that is all for today. And we will share the slides after. So thank you all.